Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our Depositing Research Data in the Texas State Dataverse repository session today. My name is Laura Waugh, and I'm glad you're here. As you can see, we do have some of these hashtags and our handle for the Outlook library in case you want to share out info to your friends and colleagues. So this session is part of the Becoming a Data Scholar workshop series put on by the Texas State University Library Scholarly Communications team. There are several other upcoming workshops, including this Introduction to Text Data Mining with HathiTrust on October 24th. We also have the GIS Share Your Research with ArcGIS Story Maps and Finding Government Statistics. And there are several others. If you go to that link, you'll be able to see them. So this program, if you're interested in becoming a data scholar, just attend one workshop from each of the 3 sections in the series, and that's all. We'll record your attendance. It's a great program for authors. So just a little overview about what we'll be talking about today. I'll just give you a little bit about Dataverse. Then on getting started in using Dataverse, we'll look at how to create a collection, which is also called a Dataverse. I'll explain that. And choosing a metadata scheme, user permissions, all of those kinds of things. And just so that you know, a copy of these slides, as well as the handouts that are available in the back, those are also available digitally in our digital collections repository, so feel free to look at copies there. So first, just a little about Dataverse. So in the Texas State University Libraries are members of the Texas Digital Library Consortium, which is a consortium of over 20 member institutions throughout the state. The Texas Data Repository is a consortial service that is offered through the TDL. Our version of that is the Texas State Dataverse. So this is the Dataverse platform itself is a platform for publishing, archiving, and sharing your research data and other data products. It's an open source application that was developed and is used by Harvard University. So it has a very strong programming community, constantly making new innovations and features. And again, our Texas State Dataverse is our local instance of the Texas Data Repository, or TDR, and that's through our membership in the Texas Digital Library. So here you'll see the Texas State Dataverse at dataverse.tdl.org. Each of the member institutions that are participating have their own Dataverse within the TDR. Ours is listed there. Also, I wanted to mention when you go to our Dataverse, in the top right, there's a link to the user guide, an about section, and also your link to log in. That user guide is constantly being updated and has great information. So if you have questions later and you just want to check that out, feel free. So here, as you can see, is our Texas State University Dataverse. And this is where you would go in and start uploading your data. And again, here in the right-hand side, if you click log in from that Dataverse site, you'll see Texas State University, and you can click on that and you'll be able to log in with your Net ID and password. Now also, if you are working on research with collaborators at other institutions, any other collaborator can also log in to our Dataverse through this Google login, and that's for people who aren't affiliated with Texas State. So that's really nice, especially if you have a large research group, sometimes from around the country or around the world. So a quick update on our Texas State Dataverse right now. We currently have 3 Dataverses and 47 data sets with over 1,800 files. And these are in a variety of different disciplines, primarily social sciences, So some of the physics and engineering folks might need to kind of step up. Just kidding. But also some frequently asked questions before we get started, kind of some things to mention. So Texas State Dataverse supports all disciplines and most every type of data, spreadsheets, GIS, data, sensor instruments, even audio, video. Primarily the only thing that it doesn't accept, other than items that aren't data, but is no confidential or sensitive information right now. If you do have that and you have questions about where you might be able to deposit that, you can still reach out to us and we can help, but just so you're aware. Also, right now the file size limits are any files up to 4 gigabytes and any data sets up to 10 gigabytes. Now, one thing to mention is you can often break up your data into smaller chunks, and we have found that a lot of people have done that and it can be useful. Now, not all data can be broken up into chunks. So if you have larger data and you're unable, obviously, to deposit in Texas State Dataverse, you can still contact us and we can help find a way to get it in. We're currently working on a pilot project for that specific purpose so that we can allow items that are greater than 10 gigabytes. We hope to have that rolled out by next fall. But right now, if you contact us, we can still work with you and find a way to get that. One other thing to mention is that the default license is the Creative Commons public domain, and that basically says anyone is free to use your data, access it, reuse it, etc. As you'll see when we get a little further in, you can change that, but just so you know, you'll need to change it because that is the default, if you choose to. And then just kind of a best practices note when you're uploading data sets. If possible, we always recommend trying to use non-proprietary formats, and that just helps other researchers when they, it helps other researchers so that they'll have a greater likelihood of being able to reuse your data. Sometimes also the proprietary formats become outdated or the software needs updating, so different things can happen. It's not always possible, but if it is possible, we recommend it. So, getting into a little bit more about the way Dataverse works. So basically, if you think of it like a bucket or containers, your data set will contain all of the descriptive metadata associated with it and all of the data files, documentation, and code. Now, the way Dataverse works is that within Dataverse, you can actually create other Dataverses or collections. So for example, if you have a research group, you may create a Dataverse for that and then upload the data sets into that Dataverse. You can also just upload data sets directly into the Texas State Dataverse, but it's just an option. So as you can see here, for the Great Horned Owl Dataverse project, they created a Dataverse and they have their data sets associated with that project within the Texas State Dataverse. So something to keep in mind, you can think of the Dataverse as very similar to a collection. They just call them Dataverse. Okay, so now we're ready to get started, and first, wanted to see if everyone would go ahead and download 1 to 2 sample data sets files from this site here. This is just a Figshare of free training downloads place, and this is just if you want to kind of follow along here. When you go to that link, under each of these data sets, when you hover over it, there's a little red arrow, and that will download the file. And you can randomly pick 1 to 2. It doesn't really matter. It's just for practice. And give everybody just a moment. So next, today we're going to be using the training Dataverse instead of the actual Dataverse, obviously because we have sample data. So if you'll go to this link here, the training, dataverse-training.tdl.org, and from there, on the top right, you'll see a button to click to sign up. And again, this is only for the training Dataverse, so you don't have to worry about it too much. From here, it will just ask you to create a username and a password and just some basic other terms of use. And I'll give everybody a couple minutes to start. Sure, I have my training Database up. Okay, and I know we can't really have a raised hand.
We can. I have chat open.
Okay, well, if everyone's done, just mention or break up. You got the chat? Okay. Well, if you're not, also let us know. But once you're within the training Dataverse here, this is very similar to what the actual Dataverse will look like. First thing we're going to do from here is to create a collection or a Dataverse. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this would be, for example, if you had a research project or just a group of researchers with a collective thing. Our example earlier was the Great Horned Owl. So what you'll do from that training site, as you'll see there, there's a link to add data, and you'll click on New Dataverse. And from there, it will ask you to describe your Dataverse. Now, this is not the individual data set, remember. So really, you can get creative. This is a training site, so it's not boldly accessible necessarily. But I just made up the Great Horned Owl Dataverse. You could try acorns or anything. But the next thing to mention here is under the name of your Dataverse, it'll ask for an identifier. And as it illustrates there, that's just a few, maybe a word or two, but that will be part of the URL. So for example, you might do GHO for a Great Horned Owl, or you could do your last name, something like that. The category, it'll ask you if this is a variety of different types of things, and you can select that as best you. And it will ask for your email address, but that is not displayed to users in the actual or training Dataverse. That's actually used, as you'll see later, so that people can contact you if they would like to request access or have questions. And then, of course, your affiliation at Texas State University. Then just a brief description about your Dataverse, perhaps the purpose of the Dataverse, and so forth. And I'll give everyone just a moment here. You can also just write test Dataverse in this one if you'd like, since it's only an exercise. Okay, see the chat. All right. Next, we will be choosing the metadata scheme. So this is the metadata field. As you can see, there is the basic use the metadata fields from TDR. And right under that, it is the citation metadata that is required. This is the metadata, that is always required. And these are those fields. Basically, a title, the person's name and last name and affiliation, the email, again, which is not displayed to users, but is used as a contact for you. And then your brief description, subjects, the production place and date. The production place can be a little bit nefarious, but it's an open text option. So, for example, it might be San Marcos, Texas. It might be worldwide. That really depends on the data. And then, of course, the kind of data. So if it's a survey data or coded data, observational, etc. One thing I wanted to mention while you're kind of looking over that, if you're catching up, in the user guide that's linked from the top right, there is a metadata dictionary. And if you have questions or want to maybe look through that before you decide on those fields, it lists everything, and it, even the various subject-specific metadata, like geospatial and journal metadata. And it'll show the definition of that, some example formatting, and then it'll also tell you whether or not it is mandatory or optional. So that's really nice. I would recommend browsing that before you start uploading and making a Dataverse, just for reference. But here you'll see if you would like to select different types of metadata, you will first uncheck the first box that says use metadata fields from TXST. And then you can select these other subject-specific, like geospatial or social science, astronomy, life science. When you click on those, to the right, you'll be able to view the fields, set them as hidden, required, or optional. So here's an example. I selected the geographic metadata. So to the right, everything is optional right now until I mark it as required. And what that means is if you mark it as required, then when you are entering data sets into your Dataverse, that field will show up as required. So the other thing you can do is, since I've selected geospatial metadata, right now everything will show up as optional. But if I uncheck a box in that list, it'll be hidden. So you can select which metadata fields to display depending on your research and your data. And so below that, when you're working on your Dataverse, creating a Dataverse, the next part is the browse and search facets. This is really handy. I was skipping ahead here. What this will show is actually the search facets that display on the right-hand side. So these three are required, obviously, the author's name, affiliation, but you can add facets and rearrange the order that they're in. So for example, if you click on grant information, grant agency, click the button, it will go to the selected list. Same with keyword terms. Then you can actually drag and drop that. So now in that display, it'll show the affiliation, keywords, subject, etc., like this. But instead, that keyword will show up under the author affiliation. So, hope that makes sense. These are just to get you kind of familiar with it. Once you've selected all of that, your metadata, at the bottom left, you will click Create Dataverse. And after a moment, success. You should have your Dataverse newly created and ready to go. So one thing to note here is that your Dataverse remains unpublished until you actually click Publish. For now, you can leave it unpublished or publish it. But the great thing about that is if you create a Dataverse and start adding data sets, you may want to only share it with your research team until you've completed the project. There are other examples, but that's one of the primary ones, and so you could leave it unpublished and only share it with certain researchers until you're ready. But next, we are going to get right on to depositing a data set in your Dataverse. So just as before, you'll go back to actually your now created Dataverse, and there's some kind of breadcrumbs there to help you find it. And you'll click that Add Data, but this time you'll click New Dataset. And similar to creating the Dataverse, it will ask you for certain questions, but of course, these are related only to that data set. And what you'll notice is the metadata listed will be reflected in what you specified for your Dataverse. So you'll add a title. You can make up anything that you'd like. Depending on the research, if this is redoing of a study or a different item like that, you can add replication data for to the title. Also, as you'll see under the author, you can add an identifier scheme, such as your ORCID ID, and then that will display next to the person's name. So since I added before on the other screen the geographic coverage, that will show up as a required field in my Dataverse for all data sets. So then at the bottom, you will just drag and drop or select the files. And for this, we're going to use those 1 to 2 sample files that you downloaded earlier from Figshare. So those should be on your desktop, hopefully. And if anyone needs the link again to go find those, just enter in the chat. Okay. And then you'll click Save Dataset. One thing here I also wanted to mention is this Edit button. Actually, you can also add tags to your data file and descriptions and things like that. So that's kind of a nice feature here. I'm not sure if it'll let me do that right now. No, okay. Well, you'll see a little bit more of that soon. Everybody having success, hopefully. I don't want to go too fast since this is kind of a demo.
I just found out if you don't drag and drop your file into the exact right place, it opens your file.
Oh, good user note there. If you don't drag the file to the exact right place, it will actually just open the file and not upload it. That is good. Okay, and then you will see this success. Your data set has been added to your Dataverse. And again, this will be a draft version, unpublished, until you click that publish button. So you can add as many data sets as you'd like as drafts and choose when you'd like to publish them and make them available to the wider community. So now moving along, we're going to look at controlling user permissions. So as you can see back on the Great Horned Owl Dataverse here, there's a button there to edit. From there, you'll click permissions in the drop-down list. And so these permissions let you decide how who can access your Dataverse, their roles. So if you click Edit Access from that screen, then you should see a screen like this. And again, just to remind you, this is for your Dataverse collection at that level. So you can really keep it very restricted. This is the default is that anyone who would like to add something to your Dataverse must be given access. But you can also make it as open as you'd like. To anyone with a Dataverse account can add sub-dataverses and datasets to your Dataverse. That's up to you. The other question asks about when you are adding a new dataset, which role should be automatically assigned to that person. A contributor would be able to edit, upload files, guest books. The curator would be able to do that, but also edit permissions and assign roles and publish the data set. So the curator has more open options. Once you've done, if you have any changes there, you can click Save Changes. And you can always go back and edit this again later, so you're not making final decisions here, but it's good to keep these things in mind. So the next thing you can do here, right underneath, is under the users groups, you can assign roles to certain user groups. So from there, you can start typing in someone's name, and if they are already a user, then their name will pop up here, their account. If they are not a user, then you can ask them to use that Google login on the Texas State Dataverse and create an account, and then their name will show up. So these are the different roles that you can assign people to your Dataverse. You may just have someone be a member, and that would mean that they can view your Dataverse, but they can't actually add files and things like that. You can also make someone a curator where they can publish, or a contributor. When you click on any of these, the specific roles, definitions will show up on the right. And also at the bottom, it has a list of all the different roles. So you have a lot of control over user permissions for your Dataverse. So once you've decided, I gave myself contributor access. I didn't want to give myself admin. I'm only kidding. But, and then you'll save changes. And you're done. That's for your Dataverse. Now, if you want to do this at the dataset level, you can do that too. You'll just click on your actual data set that you'd like to edit. And very similar to before, there's an edit button there, and you'll select permissions from the drop-down. Now here it says data set or file. That's because you can edit permissions at the data set level, or if, for instance, you have 50 files in your data set, you may want to have permissions for individual files. So you may have certain files that are restricted to your research group or that you're not ready to publish. You have complete control over those. And again, the same thing at the data set level or the file level. You'll just select that user from the drop-down and then click which role you would like for them to have. Now, here's something from the files. If you go to edit from your data set, and you should see the files listed under that, you can click the little box to the left of the actual file, and under edit files, you can click restrict. And what that will actually restrict that file from the data set so that people can't just view that. Now, as you can see underneath that, you can also unrestrict it later. And that's at the file level there, so that gives you more control. Now, for file restrictions, you can also enter the terms of access. So when you restrict that file, you can say, I'd like users to complete a data agreement, for example, or I would like them to contact me. When it says there that request access, there's a box. If you check enable access request, that is what your email is used for. They won't see your email, but there will be a button to contact the researcher, which is you, and you will get an email notifying you that someone would like to see your restricted files. So a lot of options there. So version controls, moving on from there. Okay, this is another really great feature in Dataverse. There are version controls for all of your different uploads. So there are basically two types, minor versions and major versions. A minor version would be something small, like if you just change the metadata. The citation itself will stay the same, and those minor versions are referred to as version 1 is the first file you upload. And every time you have a version change, you'll just go to 1.1, etc. So the major versions are if it's a substantial metadata change or a data file change. So if you actually change the file itself or have significant changes to the metadata, you might consider that a major version change. That does change the data citation. In the DOI, the new citation will show version 2 or version 3, etc. And I'll show you that in just a moment here. And this was less following along just for the sake of time, but here's kind of an example of how it works. When you upload your initial, we'll say, data set, it is version 1. And that's your only published version. Now, if you go in and make some small changes, when you click Save, it will ask if it's a major, minor, and I'll show you that. And then it will change to version 1.1. If it's a major change, it will change to version 2. So here, you all don't have to follow along with this really. I thought it might be too time consuming. That might be more of a deep dive class if you all would be interested in that later. But here I've uploaded another data set and I went in and made some changes in the metadata, mostly just deleting the metadata field. And then when I click publish here, because as you can see, it's still in draft form, obviously. So when I click publish, this will pop up and ask, is this a minor release or a major release? And again, if it's just a couple metadata fields, it doesn't really matter. You can click minor release. And then click continue. And then as you can see here, the citation and the DOI is the same. It does still say V1 next to this. And in the data set and at the bottom there are links to the files, metadata terms, and versions. So when you click the versions, if you have different versions, it will actually show you, 1.1, and then it will tell you what the change was. In this case, it was change the file metadata, and it was minor. And you can view details if you like. So that's kind of an overview about the versioning. So now we are going to look at creating a template for multiple data sets. And we'll just kind of go through this. If you all want to spend time on it later on your own, that might be easier. It didn't seem like really a group activity because I think it might take too long. But here's kind of the basics. So you may have a set of 10 data sets that are all very similar. And that's where this would be useful. So when you're going into Dataverse, there might be certain fields in the metadata that are the same for everything. Maybe you're the only author on all of these, or you have the same 10 researchers that you want to list for all of your datasets, for example. So this, and again, these slides are available online for reference later, but this is basically from your Dataverse, you'll click Edit, select Dataset Templates, and then enter some information. and only enter the information that will be the same for all. So as you'll see from here, we are going to, this is our Dataverse here. You'll click on Edit, and then you'll select Dataset Templates from the dropdown. Then it will have some general information about this, and in the top right there, it'll have a link to Create Dataset Template. And then it will take you to this template form. And the primary thing that's required here is the template title. And this might be the name of your research project, or if it's only you that will be uploading and you just use your name, so forth. But once you've created your template title, all of the other fields are just there if you know them, and they will be the same for all of those files. So perhaps it's a grant-funded project and you want that agency ID to show up on all of them. You would use this template, enter in any of that information. Oh, and then at the bottom there, you'll click Create Template. And then later when you're uploading your data sets, you'll be able to select a template. We're doing fairly good on time, and I was anticipating taking longer for more questions. So, really quickly here, I'm just going to also mention there are some great video tutorials that the Texas Data Repository put together that walk you through a lot of the basics on using Dataverse. There's also a subject guide we have here through the university libraries that has a lot of information and some tutorials. On the Texas State Dataverse site itself, again, there's a very robust user guide, and that has a lot of information, FAQs, things like that. And of course, from the Texas State Dataverse, and anytime you can always contact us and we'll help. But also just wanted to mention, since most of you are virtual today, there's a link to my slides in our digital collections repository, and also a link to this handout in case it is useful. A couple of things to mention: DOIs are assigned at the data set and the file level, so that's very helpful for people citing your research and so forth. And it also has a reminder of that little diagram. And that is all, and we have plenty of time for questions. And this is my email address as well, so if you have questions later. Also, if you'd like help uploading your research data, I'm happy to do that as well.